Every day the giant stepped forward, and every day an army stood frozen in fear. This is a story about a valley, two armies, and the moment when faith became more powerful than steel. What happens when an entire nation forgets what it means to trust? Let's find out. The valley of Elah stretched between two armies like an open wound. Dust hung in the air. Silence pressed down on thousands of men who should have been warriors but had become spectators. On one side stood the Philistines, confident and waiting. On the other, the army of Israel, armed, trained, but utterly still. This wasn't a battle. This was a standoff built on terror. For 40 days, the same ritual unfolded. A giant named Goliath stepped into the valley, 9 feet tall, covered in bronze armor that gleamed like a second sun, carrying a spear as thick as a weaver's beam. 40 days he shouted the same challenge, "Send someone to fight me." 40 days, no one moved. Think about that. An entire army, paralyzed not by chains but by fear. Then a boy arrived. Not a soldier, a shepherd. David came carrying bread and cheese for his older brothers, supplies from home. He wasn't supposed to be part of this war. But when he heard Goliath's voice booming across the valley, when he saw grown men flinch and retreat, he asked a question no one else dared to ask. Who is this man who defies the armies of the living God? Not how tall is he or how strong, but who does he think he is? David saw something different. Where others saw an unbeatable giant, he saw someone who had forgotten who he was challenging. David's brothers were embarrassed. "Go back to your sheep," they said. But David had already made up his mind. He went to King Saul and said something that must have sounded absurd. "I'll fight him." Saul looked at this teenager and tried to be gentle. "You're just a boy. Goliath has been a warrior since before you were born." But David wasn't offering bravado. He was offering evidence. He told Saul about the lion that came for his flock, about the bear that tried to drag a lamb away, about how, in those moments when death had claws and teeth, God had been there. "The same God who delivered me then," David said, "will deliver me now." This wasn't confidence in himself. This was memory turned into faith. Saul tried to help the only way he knew how. He offered David his armor. Bronze helmet, coat of mail, a sword that had seen real battles. David put it on, took a few steps, and stopped. This wasn't his fight to win with borrowed strength. He took it all off, picked up his shepherd's staff, walked to a stream and chose 5 smooth stones. 5 stones against a giant in full armor. The math didn't make sense. But David wasn't doing math. He was doing trust. He loaded his sling, the same tool he'd used to protect sheep, and walked toward the valley, toward the giant, toward the moment that would define everything. When Goliath saw David walking toward him, no armor, no sword, just a sling and a staff, he was insulted. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" he shouted. He cursed David by his gods, promised to feed his body to the birds. The giant saw a child. He didn't see what was coming. David didn't flinch, didn't slow down. He called back across the valley, and his words carried, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Not "I'm stronger than you think," or "I've trained for this," but "I come in the name of the Lord." The battle wasn't David versus Goliath. It was faith versus fear, and fear had already lost. David ran toward the giant. He reached into his bag, loaded a stone, swung the sling in a motion he'd practiced 10,000 times on hillsides watching sheep. The stone flew, one smooth stone against 9 feet of armor and arrogance. It struck Goliath in the forehead, the one place unprotected, and the giant fell forward like a tree cut at the base. The ground shook. The Philistines stared in disbelief. The Israelites erupted. The war turned in an instant. Not because the strongest warrior won, but because a shepherd boy remembered who fights for those who trust him. Sometimes the biggest giants fall not by strength, but by faith. No matter how big the giant in front of you may seem, remember that faith in God can overcome what fear cannot. The giants we face don't always carry spears. Sometimes they're doubts, obstacles, moments when everything tells us to turn back. But the lesson remains. Trust is stronger than terror, and faith moves when strength freezes. Subscribe for more powerful Bible stories.